Hello, I'm Cyberax with Outlandishly Crafted, and today we're going to talk about two complex subjects. First off, we're going to set up a 3D item that we can hold in our hand, and then we're going to set up how to detect when we're clicking or interacting with that 3D item to do something with it, to produce a result. And in the process, we're going to create what you see here, this marker system, where we have a 3D item in our hand, and when we click on one of these markers, we get a different result. And in this case, we can actually, with some queries on the arm, move the arm around as I'm moving my hand. So I'm using a mouse, but if you're using a controller or you're using something else, you can see that as I move my head and look different places, my hand's moving, and that's creating the particle draw effect. So I could do some really cool art with this type of thing. This also might work in VR and some other places where you're trying to mod and do some more funky things. But let's get started with the Blockbench side of things. So let's jump out of here. Let's jump back to Blockbench. And in Blockbench, I just have this simple bone structure set up with a 3D item. I have a texture set up. And you can see here, the most important thing of this process is this bone name. So the root bone name here is from the player, and there's 3 different player models, so you have to be careful about what your use case is. There are some give and takes here where it's going to work in these situations, but it's not going to work in these situations. It just depends on what you're doing. Today we're going to try to cover just getting the 3D item in and getting it to where you can detect when you click something and you do something, so that the 3D item can become an item that's usable. So for here we have our right arm and our right item, and that's what we want to attach our 3D model to. So we're going to use the same name here as we do here, and then we're going to have another bone. This is important. If we ever want to animate this, which we can do separately from this player bone, we have to have a bone in between these. You could also add another bone in here as a rotator to help line this up if you have something really complex that you need to try to line up in multiple situations. But you can't animate this bone because that's the player model bone. You can have it in here to attach them so that they attach together. So say you wanted to put something on the head of the player. I have a monkey that can ride the head of the player. Then you would make this head. If you wanted to put it on their right leg, then you'd go over here and you look at what it is. It'd be right leg. Now keep in mind, it has to be exactly like this. So it's right lowercase, uppercase L, lowercase eg. It has to be exact. So keep that in mind when you're doing it. If you wanted to put them on the helmet, only when the helmet shows up, you'd put the helmet, the leg, the chest, the body, so on. So now we have this marker. We have them set up. We have our item. We have the name. You don't need to put these in here. I've been testing ways to fix some of those don't works. You can put a locator in here, but right now these locators don't work. I do have a bug fix submitted to Mojang to fix these. They should work, but they don't. So if you need to put a locator in, you need to use this locator or put the locator into the mob's humanoid. Let's open this up so you can see what this is. So when you go into your vanilla resource pack, you have mobs. And when you click mobs, it has all of these different mobs in this one file. It's all JSON, and then you can just click which one you want. So there's three. There's humanoid, there's humanoid custom, and there's humanoid custom slim. So you need to keep in mind these aren't all the same either. These do have different use cases. So there is some problems where with particles mainly, two of these work and the other one doesn't. When you're doing 3D models, all three of them should work if you use it correctly. So you would click one of these, you import it in, and then you'd make sure that this is all set up properly, which it should be. But if you wanted to get the waist, you want to get the body, and some of these I've changed so that you can bend over and you can do other things. You can do that as well. That's all. Those are all options for you. So we take this guy, we export him out, we put him in our models folder, which we already have them here, and we have our texture, and we set up our normal, just a normal, almost like it's a normal entity. And then we make an item. So I'm using Bridge version 1. You can come in here to presets, you can go to food, and you can put in whatever you want the item to be. If we wanted to make another marker, we would do the next letter and just keep going. So once you have an item made, it will create this file, the item file here, and it'll create a item file here in your BP. Now keep in mind, I am using 1.16.0. I'm not using experimental features. If you use 1.16.100 or higher, this won't work, and it's completely different, and most of those require experimental features. So this is non-experimental features. This should work on Marketplace and anywhere else that you need. So we're 1.16.0. That allows us to have a file like this, and we're using the food. And it's important that in food you add can always eat. That allows you in survival mode to always interact with this item. So the item always will work. We have our item name. We have the use duration, which I made really long so that the item doesn't just disappear. And then we've got our, I put in nutrients -1. None of that really matters because you're not getting to this point very often where it disappears because you used it all up. This is in essence its durability. So we have our item now. We have in our item it set. We've turned off use animation, E or bow or any of that, so there's no base animation that should be playing. If you want to have that, like say you're putting in custom food and you want to have a drink, I've got like a mug that you drink from, then you could use the drink animation automatically and not have to put in your own animation. So that's an option there. And that's it. That's a basic item. So now that we have the basic item, how do we set up the 3D part of it? So to set up the 3D part, we just create an attachable, and you can create the attachable by doing in Bridge version 1, new, attachable, blank, and put in the name of the attachable. Now in the attachable, we're going to have its name. We have what material it's using. Right now, I'm not using any alphas or blends or any of that, any of those materials. I made a material guide. If you have questions about materials, it's how to make a fish tank, and it has everything and how to do that per bone and how to break down all of that. So check out that guide. So material, I'm just doing entity because it's just a basic item, or just a basic entity. It's just that solid marker. There's nothing else there. And then the texture, we attach it to our texture just like normal. If you're using Bridge, it's not going to like going to the entity folder versus an item folder, so you might have to put this in by hand. And then we have our geo, which is what Blockbench gives you. Make sure that the name here in Blockbench is the name that you're using here. And then a render controller. If you haven't done a render controller before, you can do new file, render controller, blank, put in the name of the entity, and then a render controller for this is just a standard one. The only thing I'm doing is ignoring the light, or not ignoring the light. You can ignore the light if you want to stop the ambient light from adjusting the colors of the skin. Sometimes that causes people frustrations because it tones down their art. and then what item it's connected to, and you'll see that this is a 1, so make sure that this is put in properly. So that's it. So now we have an attachable. This is the 3D part of it. Here's the texture for the 3D part. Here's controlling the materials, so if it's transparent or glows. Here's controlling the render controller if you're going to use animations or anything else for it. So that gives us the basics of a 3D model. That's it. That's all we need to do for a 3D model. However, all that gives us is when you hold something, now it's 3D. That doesn't make it interactable. It doesn't stop the player from swinging his arms when he has it in his arms when he's walking. So that's the next thing that we need to fix is most of the time you don't want the player's arms to be swinging while you have your custom items. So when the player moves, his arms swing really wildly like that, right? But when I have something in my hands, I really don't want the arms to swing, because then it will interfere with my animations when I'm moving. So when I would be moving right here, you'd get more of a pop than you're already getting from just the looping. So that's something that we want to turn off by putting an exclusion in to our animation. So let's jump over, and you can get any of these files you see me using from the vanilla pack, or you can create them with Bridge. So all of these files, they're not magic, they're not something I just made up. You can just go to the vanilla pack and you'll find the player AC in there. So in the player AC, we copy and paste it over, or you could just grab out what you want, but I'm going to use the whole thing. Down here, and it's not 23 when you're looking it up. It's probably up here at 3 or 4, but when I redo it, it drops it down to the bottom. It doesn't really matter the order it's in, it's just what's in here. So what we're going to do is for move arms, when it's asking, so this is an animation controller, so when should I use the move arm animation? And we're going to tell it, don't do it when we're holding this item. So when we're querying the item name, and then we're putting an exclamation point instead of equal, we're saying don't do it. So exclude this animation for this item. Now we could also say and when using item, so that it only excludes it when you're using it. But I think a lot of people will probably want to put in their own animation, but it's up to you. If you only want to exclude it when you're holding and using, then you would add in the on use query as well there. And you'll see that query here coming up on the next step. You don't worry about that. Now we also want to have all these others, so we do and don't do this one, and don't do this one, and we just continue this list for eternity. So every time I add a new item, this list will just be hundreds and hundreds of items that I'm going to say you can do the moving animations for everything except these things. And then we save it, and that's for third person because the first person isn't affected by it. Now you could also do this for writing. You could say do the writing arms or do the writing legs except when in my boat, or when writing this thing, or so that you can have more control over all of the player animations. Okay, so that's how do we exclude my item from the vanilla animation so that they don't stack, because they'll stack on top of each other. Now, the next step in this process is when I click on an item in my hands, so when I right click, I need it to do something. By default, because it's a food item, you would eat it. But we're not using it as a food item. We're going to use it as a interactable item. So what we need to do is we need to pull in the player's behavior file. You can do this by doing new and entity And once again, bridge 1, and you can do player, and then you can just pull in the player file right there. And then we also need to create a animation controller in the behavior pack. And this is where the complexity just gets kind of more into it, that it's not more complex. We're just doing the exact same thing we just did in the resource pack, but now we're going to do it in the behavior pack. And the difference is the resource pack runs on the client, which is on your computer device, and the behavior pack is running on the server. So for us to detect an interaction, we have to do that on the server side. For us to play an animation, we do that on the client side. So in this case, we need to add an animation controller into the behavior pack, and that's simply by doing the same thing: new file, animation controller, blank animation controller, and put in the name that you want it to be. In this animation controller, and I know this looks like a lot, but it's just the exact same thing repeated, so don't get overwhelmed by it. We'll actually minimize all of these so that you're only going to see one of them. So this is all that we're doing. We're going to have 2 states. And really quick, an animation controller in a behavior pack is called a state machine, and all it does is control what state you're in. So it's just listening for a state so that it can transition to another state. So you can think of, I'm sleeping, and then I'm listening for when it's time to wake up. The alarm plays. Now I'm going to transition into a wake state. That's a simple state machine. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, by default, we are no click is where we're going to start in our initial stage. We have a state of no click. So that's it. We have no click, nothing's happening. We're just here listening. We're listening for what's happening. And then we're going to have a state that says right click, marker A. So when you right click marker A, we want to do these things. And this is where all the power comes in, because now I can use my commands and I can use all of those things that you know how to use in the game and know how to use everywhere else. Now you can use all of those with the query system to control your players, your NPCs, everything happening in the game, which gives you all of the control you need to make the add-ons and the mods that you want. So here we have right click marker A transition. We have no animations playing in this first state. We just have a list of transitions. So we say, okay, if query get item name is marker A, so if I'm holding in my hands marker A and I'm using it, so I'm using marker A. Hey you're listening for what's happening. I'm using marker A, but I'm not sneaking and I'm not jumping. Then go to this state. So I go to this state and I say, on entry to this state, say this to the player. So I'm going to tell the player, hey, here's some feedback. That happened, that worked. We detected this click, and I'm telling you what you're doing. And you can use a website. Right. I should have had this already up and ready, but you can use. Oh, I can't find it. There's a syntax website to do all of the /tells and all of that stuff for you, so that if you're ever wanting to put these in and have them pretty, it does all of the work, which is really handy. And I'm looking through my favorites really quick to see if I can find where it's at, and I don't see it. Okay, here it is. So it's Minecraft.tools, and you can come down here to style text or JSON text. Nope, not style text, sorry, JSON text. And in here you can get all of the text formatting that you want. But they also have a title generator. So if you do this one, you can put in here whatever you want with the different colors and symbols and bolding, and then generate it. And you want this one down here. So you'd copy this right here, and then you'd put that into here. And just like any command, you can test it in the game first, but you want to do @self action bar, I did this. And then all I'm doing next is playing an animation. So for the player to be able to hold their arm up and move it around, all that is me just running this /play animation command. And then the animation is going to play for a certain amount of time. And as the animation plays, then it will stop, and that transition right here will just repeat. And that's the blinking you see, it's just this transition repeating. And you could clean up that that blinking if you want by, instead of using a command, actually play this in the player with a animation controller on the RP side. So go back to how you normally would play an animation and play it that way, instead of cheating, or being lazy in essence and doing it how I'm doing. So let's look at what the animation is I'm calling. So there's an animation for each of these, and the animation I'm calling, it just has an effect which calls the lead hold, which we already looked at. That's this guy in the player. He calls the effect marker, and then I just do it at the beginning and the end of a 20.25 second loop, so that we play the animation, and every time it plays the animation, it's putting down particles, and those particles are being dropped on the map. And then each one of these is just calling a different particle, and then that's where you get the kind of the Rave effect. Okay, now that we've got that animation controller and our behavior pack set up, we've got our detection in here for our right click. We have to add it into our player file. So we need to go into animations, into the player file. If it's not there, you can hit description and it'll be down here. And we want to put in what we're going to call it. So marker interact detector is what I put in. Then we put in what that name is, put that here, and we then throw it in to our script. So it's animate, put it in as a 1, it's always running, and that will activate that behavior pack AC so that we'll actually hear it and it'll work in the game. If we jump back into the player's RP file, I've called each of those particle effects here because that animation is being called against player, and so you have to define those markers, those particle effects here, to call them in the animation, and that's what's allowing it to track with the arm. So the arm, it can track with the arm is because the particles are being called on the location of that locator. So you can see better with this one. So there's different markers that you can do different things with. So you can see as I move, the particles are being called on where that is. And it creates this really great effect where now I can move. Now it's not going to do it when I crouch or when I jump, but it is going to do it when I move around, and I'm still in control of my arm. And then you have this ability to really do whatever you want with it. Now if you're doing like 3D weapons or all of that, this is going to come in useful in the same way, because you want to be able to animate those attacks and those things. And there's a lot of options there for how to expand this out. So let's jump over to another pack that I've already created and see how I've expanded out the system in different ways. And we've really covered the whole thing. That's it. We made an item. We made an attachable to go to the item. Now, one of the important things is that the identifier of the attachable has the same name identifier of the item. That's really the most important thing there, is that those two attach and are the same. And then we added an animation controller in. We excluded ourselves from the default animation. So you can see here I've got some flowers in my hand. I am letting the arm swing with these flowers because it looks good. So that's fine. That's okay. I could go in and exclude it. And then when I click, the flowers go up and I offer the flowers out. And you see it says show flowers. And then let's go out of here because it's pretty chaotic. And we'll go outside and I'll show you the flowers again. So now when I click the flowers, you see a particle happened. So the rose petals come off. And then we also spawn a butterfly. So I click, I spawn a butterfly. So I'm doing, on one right click, I'm doing 3 different actions. Now let me show you from the first person view. And I've set up an animation for both third person and first person. So on the first person, then you see it go. If I crouch, I've set up a HUD system that tells you what's happening and what your buttons are. So because we can detect more than one query, so we could say, okay, well, you're interacting. What if I'm shift interacting? So now I'm crouch interacting. So if I crouch interact, then I drop the flowers on the ground, and I'm just running another summon command that summons the entity version of the flowers. And then on the flowers, I have an interact. So when I crouch, click, they give me the item back. So it goes back, it kills off the entity, and it gives me the item. So I shift drop, and here's my entity. I shift pick up, oops, that was the wrong button. I shift pick up, and here's my flowers. Now I also put in the option for a jump click, and then it would drop it. So I have a monkey here. So if I jump click, then he's gonna drop the monkey angry, and the monkey's gonna go attack. If I shift click, it's gonna drop the monkey in defensive mode, and if I just click, it's just gonna use the special ability of the monkey. So you can see the monkey here. I click, and he plays music, which is his special ability. I shift click, and I drop him on the ground. I shift click to pick him up. I jump click, and now he's angry, and he jumps back on my body because he does that. He likes me. He was going to go attack those guys. So let's try that again. I click him, I pick him up. So I got him in my hands. I jump click, and now he's in angry mode and wants to go attack something. And you can translate that into lots of different methods of how you want to do things. But the main point is here, I'm showing you that there's lots of different ways to interact with the items in your hand, not just one. So now let's talk about like a 3D weapon. So if I say an axe, so I'm going to take a holdable axe. So here's an item that I've added an attachment to. On the inside, I'm the same thing. I've lined them up. And now I have multiple attacks. So I have a light attack, I have a heavy attack, I have a special attack, and then I have another special attack. So let's see those. So I have normal attack is my martial arts attack. That's the left click. Right click is a side attack. So that's this guy. That's detecting, that's the BP, animation controller, detecting the right click, playing an animation like that. Now I have shift attack, which is overhead. That's me sneak attacking. So that's me now saying, query, what am I using? I'm using it and I'm sneaking at the same time. Whereas before we were saying we're not sneaking and we're not jumping. Now I'm saying I am sneaking, but I'm not jumping. So then the next one is a jump attack. So then I can do an overhead flip attack. And each of them has a timeout, so you can't just do them right away. You have to wait for the timer to finish. So now I do an overhead jump attack. And then that gives me 4 different attacks that I can do with one item just from there. And then you can also do like sneak jump interact. You could do a jump sneak interact. You could try to like really mix them up and put in combos for more options and more stuff. You could do sneak left click, which is your main attack. You can do jump left click. All of those can be moved into different abilities now that you have the ability to detect when the player is clicking the button. You can combine that together to make your 3D items do lots of different things. So the last thing is, how do I make the 3D item damage someone else? So I have the 3D item. When I do stuff, it doesn't do anything. It's not interacting. It doesn't hurt anybody. So this is where it gets back to being complex because there's just so many things going on by this point. So let's go to our weapons. And I did this ages ago. So there's a few different ways to do it. The way that I like the best, that's the easiest, except for the undead things. So skeletons, zombies, and some of those others are really a pain. So you can cause them to, just by using the commands, I'm going to cause effect on all skeletons nearby that are within range for poison. In this case, I'm executing on nearby mobs and instant damage. I like instant damage better than poison, but all of these mobs, the undead mobs, have different immunities that you have to be careful for. If you're just making your own stuff, then it's no big deal. You just use normal mobs and it's fine. I would use the instant damage then. So anybody nearby that's this, you used instant damage. Now you could put in a randomizer if you don't want it to always do it. Say you want to do more D&D style where you're doing 1 through 20 damage. You could put in a randomizer, some math. There's lots of options in there. You can even have a function run against it. You could have logic inside the mob play and just execute that logic. So there's lots of options inside all of those. You can see here on the undead, I added in an execution, and I am executing on the player special ability. In this case, I'm putting in a dropper that causes knockback. So I created a fake entity that's invisible that when I do this, if there's an undead nearby, then it's going to drop a fake entity there, and the fake entity is then going to execute the roar knockback, which is then going to blow the skeletons away. And this is still just a BPAC, just more complex, that we were just going over. So it's a behavior pack animation controller, and I just have all of those different weapons in here and their special attacks and when they're sneaking and when they're jumping and what you just saw in that mace. That's all in here. And depending on which one it detects, so the mace could have one effect, the axe could have another effect. They could play animations against the mob even. So say I want to cut the mob in half. I could have an animation that plays that cuts the mob in half when I use an axe. But when I use a mace, it plays the blows the mob apart. So you have all of those abilities and options to start doing all of those things because you can now start detecting this this part of it, that you have that BPAC to do all these queries, which is the real key, is getting these queries in here and then firing off your behavior. And then I put a timer in here for a delay, and you can use this same thing for magic. So say we come up here and we want to make staffs. We could do the same thing for casting. We can do the same thing for skill systems. All of those reward systems, quest systems, having readable books, skill systems, all of those things can be done in here by just being able to detect what is in your hand. So let's go back to that. Let's actually jump over here to the Torchly Doom demo, and I'll show you really quick just some of those other things to give you an idea of if you expand out the BP system and the 3D items and converting between a 3D item and an entity, which is really a cool interaction, then you can start having something like, here's my mug, and when I click, I right click, now he's going to take it up, he's going to think about drinking it slow, then he's drinking it, and you see all the meanwhile there's animation playing in the cup, right? So the animation in the cups having less and less liquid in it because the attachment can have an animation, and now it's full again. Now I can also sneak and it's dripping out liquid, and then it just replaces itself. It's just playing an animation, and you can see it just drips it out. Is that sick? Now at the same time, just like before, I can crouch, drop, and there's my entity now. Now you can take it a step further and have a smart entity that now I can hit the entity and I can break the entity and knock the entity over. I can click it, I can pick it up, and now he's back in my arms, and then I can go back to drinking him again. So the same thing goes for all of the different types of entities that you pick up. So let's jump over and let's find something we can pick up. So we come in here and we find a chair, and we pick up the chair, and we go, and here's the chair. So it's a 3D item in my hands. It's the same geo. Now I'm back, I drop the chair, and there's the chair. The chair is sittable. Oh, I'm in creative mode, so I gave him a whole bunch of chairs, but I can pick them all up then. I got all my chairs. I put my chair down. I'm not left clicking, I'm right clicking. I know it looks like an egg, but that's just the picture. That's just what I'm giving you to make it nice on you. And then same thing, the chair is breakable. So now we've got the same thing. We have intelligence inside the entity. We pick him up, take him with us, then we put him down. And you can do that with everything. Now if something's too big, so say it's something that's large, like a bookshelf, you pick it up. Let's get all this crap out of our inventory. Oh, let's pick this guy up instead. This one's more fun. And we go outside. I'm just going outside because it's easier to see. And so there you go. There's all of our swords. And now all I did was use a different geo. So I made one geo for in your arms being held, and I made another geo for when you place it on the ground as an entity. So there you go. You got it. And I just have them auto rotate because we're using a rotation tool instead. So give at self rotate. Oh, rotate. If I spell it right helps. So I use a rotation tool. So I just center it to 0 on entity spawn. And then to carry this one step further on the smart side of it, we have repair. Right? So we can break it. It's just playing an animation. We repair it. We can change it. Same thing, just swapping geos or swapping animations. You could do this by detecting, or you could do it by an interaction. And then you have the same thing for change color. So you use the dye system. put the dye system in with a little bit of a some events and a randomizer, and then you can change the colors. And it's not a lot of change because I don't want, but I did go in and take the swords out. I'm using the correct material for this for color change alpha so that the swords aren't changing colors as much as the wood is. And this applies to all of the different things in here. You can go in and change their colors, and you can change their textures. You break them. But the same thing, once you start doing, you start expanding out the interactions, then you can really start getting more advanced on what you're doing and what your options are, because now you can detect the interactions a lot better, and it gives you a lot more control for what you can and can't do just by being able to pick up and carry and have those 3D items in your hands. That it just seems like magic for most people, but you saw really all we did was add in an attachable. The attachable is the same geo as what we were already using for the entity. So if you already have a whole bunch of entities built, the attachable is the same thing. And if you need to scale them down with an animation, then it's not hard to scale them down and make them smaller. So you can go from real big to real small without having to. That's a trash can. I didn't mean to put those in there. But for like the vase, you can go real small to having it in the vase or having it on the ground. I don't know why that just didn't stack. Those should just go in each other. I didn't have to do it right. I must not have done it right. Whatever. So there you go. That's the guide for 3D items and detecting interactions to get yourself a Rave style marker system, I guess. Really, I'm just using the Rave style marker system as a way to show you the arm moving and how you can have that interaction do a lot more than just hit someone or do damage or cause effect or do magic, but you can have it do stuff like this. So there you go. If you have any questions, check out my website, outlandishlycrafted.com. Check out my other guides. Follow, like, do all that stuff everybody else says. And I can most often be found in the Blockbench Discord channel in Bedrock support side of it if you have more questions or would like help. So check me out. Thanks for watching, and I hope this helps you figure out how to get your 3D items and interactable stuff working in Bedrock Minecraft. Have a good afternoon.